and now State Director for Rural Development for the U.S. Ag Department, and Nicole Stallworth, Assistant VP of Government Relations and Community Relations at Oakland University. Before we get started, Jason, I just got to ask, where could a man get a suit like that?
Well, this is made in Cleveland, Tennessee, in a rural part of Tennessee, a small manufacturer that we sell to our family's business.
Okay, well, you certainly look sharp. You both look sharp.
Thank you, sir.
This morning, you're embarrassing me to death in my jeans and golf shirt. It got a little drunk out last night on Mackinac Island, so
you
I'm
look good
doing
in a
the
bow
best
tie,
I
sir.
can. I might try a bow tie. So we've been hearing a lot since the 2016 presidential election about the difference between urban voters and rural voters, and the sense that urban voters or rural voters prevailed, rural and suburban voters prevailed in the last election. And in Michigan, of course, we see this state increasingly population being centered in urban areas, becoming more urban and less rural, and it plays out in a number of issues. I mean, Jason, you all have the best roads up here in the state. I driving on these roads, once we pass like Midland, feels like I'm driving in Ohio and not Michigan. I mean, you don't have the same horror stories, and part of the reason for that is Public Act 51, which distributes road money not based on population, but on other factors, and so you get a disproportionate amount of the road money up here. That's one issue. Is it time, given the urbanization of our population, for us to start looking at those kind of formulas and favoring the places where more people live?
Well, I think that is one of the mix in rural America. And sort of in our role, certainly infrastructure has been one of the sort of preeminent areas. And so we have been focusing a lot on sort of how do we work on better partnerships with our local units of government to help assist in these types of decisions that are being made on a local level. Because of our rural nature, we have the ability to support road commissions and municipalities to build that sort of infrastructure that is necessary for attraction of tourism, agricultural development, which is part of the reason why this area has been so successful is the agriculture nature of it and the growth that's been going on, which is dependent on good infrastructure.
Nicole, is all of that coming at the expense of urban residents who are providing the bulk of the funding and the bulk of the tax dollars?
I don't think so. The state of Michigan most of us realize that the state of Michigan is primarily rural. We have some urban...
In terms of its geography.
In terms of the geography, that's right. And so I think that it's important to make certain that as we begin to think about how we create an infrastructure process to support the people of the state of Michigan, that we consider that we need to be supportive of our entire state such that it can be successful. The good thing that Jason mentioned is that we talk about agriculture. We are dependent on some of the agricultural areas that support our urban areas, and so I don't think that it's at the expense of our urban areas. I think it's really important to kind of be more cognizant in terms of those levels of decision making and working together to support the entire state.
Jason, do you think that our political class in this state, in this nation, hears the voices of rural voters and rural residents?
Well, I think the thing that's been most interesting has been sort of what the template has been laid out in the Department of Agriculture. There was a report given to the Michigan Farm Bureau and the National Farm Bureau in January, which has laid out some very specific objectives that we have to address over these next 3 years. Item number one is rural connectivity, which is the aspect of broadband and what is necessary to help with precision farming, because if you're going to be competitive in agriculture, you're going to have to be able to be better utilization of your input costs. Number two is attraction of talent into rural America. Number three is
same problem in that urban area.
Right, and then the next big area is sort of what are we going to be doing on sort of the healthcare, what are we going to be doing to support that, and then the final area is entrepreneurship.
Nicole, you think about the leadership in this state and the potential leadership in the state, very heavily weighted to outstate Michigan. I think all of our legislative leadership is now from outstate. And you look at the gubernatorial candidates, most, if not all of them, live outside of the Detroit metro area, at least the Tri-County metro area. Does that shortchange the voters in that urban area?
I don't know. I don't believe it shortchanges anyone. One of the things that's important, I think, to be able to recognize, in particular when we talk about leadership within the state, is to be able to have that perspective. Many of us realize that the issues that many people who live in rural communities have are very similar to urban communities. However, juxtaposedly, it's important to really understand the issues that Detroiters have, which are very much different than the rest of the state of Michigan. So I wouldn't say that it shortchanges anything. I would also say it's an opportunity to become more engaged and aware and to really recognize where the similarities lie and to be able to find middle ground as we begin to address some of these issues.
So where do the similarities lie? Where do the differences lie between the two groups of?
Well, I think one area, if I may, is the whole issue of poverty. And so the Wall Street Journal did a very good job, if you haven't had an opportunity to review that last fall, on rural poverty issues. And they are very significant and often as challenging as they are in urban areas. And then the actual urban versus rural economic mobility often is a real challenge for students to be able to find employment in their communities. And I think those are very similar to what we're having in urban communities.
So we had this whole entire discussion around mobility this time around, and things that we don't often think about is the time it takes for a kindergartner to be able to make it to school in a rural community.
True.
And many of those children, 5-year-olds, are on a bus for an hour just to be able to get to school in the morning. We have similar issues in Detroit, just being able to get transportation, be able to have access to transportation, to be able to get to some of the suburban communities where, for example, where Oakland University is. That's a really good example. It's a 30-minute commute. There's not really a transportation infrastructure in place for people to be able to access the campus. So we talk about those kinds of things. Again, poverty issues, access to quality education, access to health care. So those are some of the kinds of things that I think we can all rally around and be able to develop a policy agenda that speaks to almost everyone.
Jason, do you worry that the rural communities, particularly the more remote rural communities in our state, are going to be shut out of this mobility revolution, that you have so many off-the-track roads, if you will, off-the-map roads, that mobility is not going to work, and the autonomous future is not going to work as well in rural America and rural Michigan as it will in urban Michigan?
Well, some of the things that we've seen in the actual agricultural area and what they're doing in the ability to operate farm vehicles in very challenging climate and environment has been remarkable. And certainly there are going to be, if you're going to be heading out into rural parts of the Upper Peninsula, rural parts of Michigan, challenges. But as we expand the broadband network and the fiber and where we're headed, hopefully that will catch up. The millions of dollars that are available for infrastructure in the fiber space or the broadband space is coming to us through rural utilities, through specific areas in agriculture, and hopefully that will help support these types.
So, there is a technology divide. Just as there is a technology divide within urban areas between, on the basis of economics, there's a technology divide on the basis of geography in our state.
So to give you an example of somebody that's really used rural utility dollars is Midwest Electric and Communications down in Cassopolis, and they have put in 1 gigabyte using to every household, and they've used our federal dollars to support that. And then you get into other communities which have not had the vision to access these types of tools, and it's been very challenging to get capacity.
So we hear a lot about, we've talked a lot this week about the shortage of workers, and that's particularly acute of skilled workers, particularly acute in the urban areas in Metro Detroit, where every company is looking for workers of every skill level. Rural areas, you tend to see unemployment a bit higher, more workers than job opportunities, and there's a lot of discussion about how to bring jobs into that area, those areas. Should the discussion change? Should it be how to bring those workers to where the jobs are rather than the jobs to where the workers are?
Well, the thing that you got to look at, and then I apologize, is the connectivity. If there's the capacity to get there, I would argue that it's much easier to bring the manufacturing to those small communities.
I would argue a little bit differently in terms of how we utilize our resources. I think it's really important for us to be thinking about how we utilize our resources in ways that best support an infrastructure that we have in place. And so if we're going to be concentrating our efforts to attract, retain, support, develop talent, we need to be making certain that we're doing that in a way that makes sense for the entire state of Michigan. I always think about whether or not I'm in favor of taking and distributing our resources to the point where we're not able to really support that. And so I would be in favor of perhaps creating a pipeline to be able to share and exchange. One of the better things about the rural areas is the agricultural aspect. So if there are people in some of these urban communities that are interested in agriculture, they might want to travel to one of these rural communities. However, if it's something that we're talking about manufacturing, we're talking about some of the more technologically based aspects of our economy, then perhaps some of those individuals in those rural communities might want to be able to travel to some of the urban areas to be able to take advantage of those opportunities.
Jason, do you sense that as our population shifts and as it moves more into urban areas, that the understanding of the two groups, the urban residents and the rural resident, that's growing, that's lessening, that there's less in common?
It's a transition. As you know, we've gone from an agrarian economy to an industrial economy. Now we're into sort of the next waves of things. We see significant declining high school graduation rates in so many of the smaller communities, really north of Clare. And so as you look at those footprints, you have seen fewer people having an understanding of deer hunting, having an understanding of farming, having an understanding of being out in the woods and enjoying the beauty of our state. And so we have to continually make sure people enjoy the beauties of our communities.
Nicole?
So I would say that, we don't shoot deer in the backyard in Detroit.
Perhaps
so
we should.
that's probably, because there are many.
Yeah.
But so just in terms of the cultural differences, it's great to be able to have that type of a difference, but there's a big difference in terms of understanding the culture. And I think it's important to try to create and facilitate ways for us to more of us to be able to take the time to really understand the difference in culture. I mean, you talk about, hunting, those sorts of things, and being able to use rifles and firearms. That's really not something that, from an urban perspective, in an urban community, that's smiled upon necessarily.
But here we are, and that's what we're trying to do. Jason Allen, Nicole Wells, Stallworth,
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.